A fire can hold one group's stories. But 9,000 years ago, thousands of people lived so tightly together that the roof became the road, and nobody had an engine, a crane, or a city planner. Plausible. At dawn, you climbed through your ceiling and stepped into the morning commute across your neighbor's roofs. The ladder creaks. The roof is still cool under your feet. Below, a hearth is already burning, a child's voice calling across the rooftops. In Çatalhöyük's dense core, homes pressed together without streets between them, so rooftops likely linked households. The exact roots are lost. Archaeologists call it Çatalhöyük. Thousands of people in shared wall mud brick homes packed so tightly that the roof became the road. The density is documented. Who held power is not. They had no engines, no written plans we can read, and no clear archaeological evidence of a king directing the whole settlement. Yet the town kept working. What made thousands of separate households return to the same arrangements tomorrow? Myth, a difficult ancient build, is not evidence of lost technology. Ropes, sledges, ramps, practiced hands, and a fed workforce can do extraordinary work. The harder question is how a settlement kept everything arriving together. The visible tools were simple. The difficult part was making the crew, the food, the materials, and the shared plan arrive again the next day. So, if there was no secret machine, what kept the work moving? Coordination, not mysterious tools, is the question. Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and Uruk each preserve a different answer, which is why the first city is not a trivia question. Documented, Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and Uruk are well-attested archaeological sites. Whether any of them counts as the first city depends on the definition of city, not on a missing fact. Is it walls? Jericho had a wall and stone tower by roughly 8300 BCE. A labor estimate suggests about 11,000 workdays. That estimate depends on how the work was organized. 11,000 workdays. That is 30 years if one pair of hands did it all. And the hands were the point. Is it density? Çatalhöyük packed thousands into a honeycomb 9,000 years ago. No streets between the tightly packed houses of the dense core. Is it everything together? The crowds, the temples, the writing, the rulers. Then Uruk is one of the strongest candidates for an early city. In Mesopotamia, more than 5,000 years ago, perhaps tens of thousands, lived around huge temple complexes, clay lists tracking goods and workers, and a society where some people clearly had more power than others. 3 candidates, 3 definitions. The most honest answer is that first depends on what you mean by city. And there's another problem. Some of the places that would settle the argument may now be underwater. Since the last ice age, global sea level has risen about 120 meters, drowning vast prehistoric coastlines. Documented. Pavlopetri is a submerged Bronze Age town with streets and houses. Local sinking and earthquakes are leading explanations for why this particular town went under. Plausible. Drowned coasts may preserve early settlements we cannot investigate, so first may be a question we can't yet see the whole of. They cannot identify a hidden first city or prove a lost global civilization. The archaeology is real. Online, 3 people can read it and immediately open 3 tabs titled, Actually. People did not settle for one universal reason. But the more households settled near food, water, crops, or trade routes, the more they depended on each other. Stores needed guarding, shared work, needed repeating, and one dispute could spill beyond a family. That was the coordination problem cities made enormous. Without engines, cranes, or computerized logistics, builders used tools they could repair themselves and routines that kept people, food, and materials arriving. The exact method changed from project to project and is often unrecoverable. Jericho's tower, roughly 8 meters tall, with a staircase spiraling inside. Its builders left no written plans that we have found. Somehow, people knew what to build, how to build it, and how to teach the next person. Exactly how that knowledge was organized is lost. At Uruk, raised temple platforms dominated the skyline. Moving their mud brick and plaster took huge crews, while clay records show goods and work organized at a scale earlier settlements rarely show. Food, skill, records, and authority kept workers returning for years. Plausible. A mud brick platform could divide work. Some people dug clay, Others mixed straw, filled molds, dried bricks, and carried yesterday's output forward. The surviving evidence shows the scale of the work, not a shift schedule for one specific build. A brick is heavier than it looks. Wet clay, still cool, still holding its shape. You pass it before your arms decide to argue. The next pair of hands is already reaching. One person passed forward a wet brick. Another had already shaped the next. If the water jar or lunch basket arrived late, the whole line stood still. A ramp is not glamorous. It's the ancient answer to every online theory that begins, okay, but how did they get it up there? Most ancient construction was not one impossible lift. It was a chain of short, repeatable jobs, and the chain failed the moment food, water, tools, or workers stopped arriving. Dense settlement brought people, animals, waste, and drinking water uncomfortably close. Plausible, brewing may sometimes have made local waters safer. But beer was not what built the first cities. Feeding the builders was. Thousands of strangers need feeding. Once you're feeding thousands, somebody has to count the grain. Documented. Early Mesopotamian tablets recorded grain, goods, workers, and rations. In later city records, beer rations become visible. A worker or household was owed a measured share. More than 1,000 years after Uruk's earliest tablets, a customer named Nani sent the merchant Ea Nasir a clay tablet complaint about poor quality copper. The complaint survived. 4,000 years later, the internet still runs on the same customer service energy. The tablet did one quiet thing. It let a promise outlast the person who made it. Cities cost something real. Across many early farming communities, and later in dense settlements built on their food, diets narrowed around staples, while cavities, disease, and repetitive strain became more common. Packed streets gave infectious disease room to spread. The city gave, the city took. And mostly the same people were on both sides. So if cities were harder on the body, why did anyone stay? The city gives stored food, protection, trade, and opportunity, a scale a small band cannot reach. The city takes dependence, debt, disease, and inequality. Written records make the imbalance visible. In some Mesopotamian records, loans carried rates around 30%. Records document enslaved people, captured, sold, forced to work. Cities did not invent inequality, they made it easier to enforce. That was the urban bargain. Gather, store, and redistribute surplus at a scale a band cannot, while creating new dependencies on whoever controls it. Once you build a city, you have to keep the bloody thing alive. Grain had to stay dry, water had to arrive, waste had to leave, and walls had to be repaired before danger arrived. The solutions changed, but the pressure did not. Humans could build enormous temples before solving one considerably less glamorous problem. Where does everyone's waste go? The answer varied. Pits, drains, channels, streets, fields, rivers, all took some of the burden. It helped. It never made a dense, ancient city clean by modern standards. That maintenance problem followed urban life for millennia. By Roman Pompeii, water systems, drains, stepping stones, and sloped streets helped manage rain, waste, and traffic. Ancient sanitation was clever, but it was never clean in the modern sense. A city is a giant storeroom for grain, water, people, and promises. It's also where a blocked drain stopped being one household's problem and became the ancient version of a neighborhood group chat. Everyone needed it fixed, and somebody still had to start. Above ground, a failed system made city life filthy. Below ground, a failed system could make it fatal. And once humans learned to coordinate life above ground, they could use the same trick somewhere far stranger. Documented, Derinkuyu in Cappadocia is a later underground complex enlarged and reused over centuries, not one of the first cities. Its ventilation shafts, wells, storage rooms, animal spaces, and rolling stone doors are documented. Plausible, these features supported refuge during periods of danger, but we do not know how long particular groups remained below ground. Together, they show the same urban rule under extreme pressure. Shelter worked only while people kept air, water, food, animals, and exits coordinated. Without that shared routine, a refuge became a trap. But routines have a problem. Somebody has to remember them. And once a settlement became large enough, human memory wasn't enough. At Uruk, memory began turning into clay. Around 3300 to 3000 BCE, a harvest became a clay entry. Grain arrives, a worker receives a ration, and someone checks what was promised. Writing was not invented for poems. It started as, Dave delivered 14 sacks of barley, and suddenly a promise could survive after Dave went home. That was the real machine. People, food, records, repeated routines, trust, and authority, moving together. There were no gears. There never were. Çatalhöyük left no written rulebook, but its repeatedly rebuilt, tightly packed homes show shared habits enduring across generations, evidence of coordination, though not proof of who directed it. Writing did not create cooperation. It made obligations more durable and harder to step away from. But the bigger the system became, the more people depended on it working. And sometimes the system itself created the problem. Farming channels brought river water to the fields. The sun evaporated it. Where drainage was poor, salt stayed behind in the soil. Documented. Southern Mesopotamian fields faced salinization, salt building up in irrigated soil. Wheat tolerates salt less than barley, and records from parts of southern Mesopotamia show barley becoming more prominent over time. Plausible. Salt was one major pressure alongside drought, political conflict, and invasion, not a single cause explanation for collapse. Fortifications could slow danger. They could not repair fields turning white with salt. The crisis was not abstract. Failing fields meant less food, weaker institutions, and fewer ways to survive the next shock. Salt was one pressure inside a larger failure. Fields produced less, control fractured, and conflict intensified. The systems that moved food stopped protecting everyone who depended on them. When Ur fell, that was the shape of it. Your pay stub still does one of the jobs those clay tablets did: recording work, obligation, and payment. Your plumbing, food delivery, and commute depend on people you will probably never meet doing their part. The buildings changed. The dependents did not. But cities aren't systems to the people living inside them. They're home. At Çatalhöyük, the roof hatch opens again. Plausible reconstruction. A household may have climbed down the roof hatch into a small white room with a hearth and a sleeping platform. Walls replastered across generations. The wall is mudbrick, the same material the whole episode has been made of. Someone pressed it, someone set it, someone replastered it, and someone else came home through the roof above it, and beneath some platforms, people had been buried. Children and adults were buried beneath the floors, sometimes with objects and carefully arranged remains. Some skulls were later removed, kept, or reburied. The exact relationships and meanings remain debated, but daily life unfolded directly above the dead. What is clear is that households repeatedly renewed these homes while keeping their dead beneath the floors. It was a room, a hearth, a roof hatch you climbed through to come home. The hearth is warm. Someone carried that firewood up the same ladder this morning. 9,000 years later, it shows what the archaeology can document. A dense settlement was repeatedly remade as a home. So how did ancient humans build the first cities? There was no single first city blueprint. People built with hands, simple tools, local materials, and accumulated skill. In later places, such as Uruk, clay records and powerful institutions helped organize grain, labor, obligation, and sometimes force. The roof hatch at Çatalhöyük shows the answer in miniature. One household could raise a wall. A dense town survived only if many households kept rebuilding, storing food, sharing space, and returning to the same workable habits, even when archaeology can no longer tell us who made each rule. Stone alone was never enough. The first cities weren't built by machines. The first cities were the machine. People, food, records, and repeated routines moving together. Thousands carried bricks, grew food, dug channels, kept records, and settled arguments, trusting that tomorrow everyone else would come back. The technology wasn't hidden. It was us all along. Tonight, you'll lock a door. They climb through a roof hatch. Different technology, same reason. Thousands of people could build a city by depending on strangers. But what happens when those strangers disagree? Once a dispute involved more than one family, somebody had to negotiate, obey, judge, or fight. So what stopped every disagreement becoming violence? Next time, what did ancient humans do when it rained all week? Subscribe for more stories about your ancient body and your modern life. The fire is still burning. This is the old human.